Sometimes the most powerful acts come from the gentlest hearts. When we see someone forgotten by the world, we have a choice to walk by or reach out our hand. Viking captain Eirik Stormshield saw a beggar woman shivering on the harbor docks. His crew expected him to ignore her like everyone else. Instead, he lifted her up and declared her his wife. His warriors called him mad. The townspeople whispered of curses, but by dawn, everything changed. The woman sleeping in his longhouse was not who she seemed. She was Solveig, daughter of a murdered king, hiding from those who wanted her dead. Her past held dangerous secrets. What truth was she hiding that could destroy them both? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to Bornvik harbor like the breath of sleeping gods, and Eirik Stormshield stood at the edge of his world, watching the sun paint the water gold. 20 years he had called this place home. 20 years since he had first driven his longship onto these shores as a young warrior, seeking purpose beyond the endless cycle of raid and plunder. Now, at 43 winters, Eirik commanded respect that went deeper than fear. His broad shoulders carried not just the weight of his burning mail, but the trust of every soul in Bornvik. The settlement had grown under his protection, from a handful of rough shelters to a thriving community of 200 souls. Merchants came from distant lands to trade, families raised children in safety, and the elderly lived their final years in peace, rather than anxiety. The woman he had claimed as wife still slept in his longhouse, wrapped in the finest furs his home could offer. 3 days had passed since that moment of madness or clarity. He could no longer tell which. His hand moved unconsciously to the leather-wrapped handle of his family axe, the weapon that had belonged to his father and his father's father before him. The Stormshield axe bore the weight of honor, each nick in its blade a story of protection given and oaths kept. "You're brooding again, Captain." The voice belonged to Born Ironarm, his second-in-command and closest friend since their youth. The grizzled warrior approached with the careful step of a man who had learned when to speak and when to wait. "Am I?" Eirik's voice carried the roughness of mourning and unspoken doubts. "Perhaps I have cause." Bjorn settled beside him on the harbor stone, his own weathered hands clasped around a horn of warm ale. "The men are talking. Men always talk. It passes the time between battles. This is different." Bjorn's tone grew serious. "Some question your judgment. Others speak of curses and ill fortune. A few wonder if the woman has bewitched you with dark arts." Eirik turned to study his old friend's face. Bjorn had stood beside him through 17 years of raids, through the great storm that nearly claimed their ship off the Orkney Islands, through the fevered winter that took 30 souls, including Eirik's own wife and infant son. If Bjorn carried doubts, they deserved hearing. "And what do you think, old friend?" "I think you saw something in her eyes that spoke to the man you are, not the warrior you've had to become. I think 3 days of kindness have revealed more about her character than most people show in 3 seasons." Bjorn paused, choosing his words with care. "I also think she carries secrets that could bring trouble to our door." The observation held truth that Eirik could not deny. In those first hours, as he had brought the woman to his longhouse and watched his thrall women help her bathe and dress in clean clothes, he had seen the transformation. Beneath the grime and rags lay not just beauty, but bearing. The way she held her head, the careful courtesy of her speech, the intelligence that flickered behind those remarkable green eyes. None of it spoke of a life spent begging in the streets. "Secrets are like axes," Eirik said finally. "Dangerous when hidden, useful when revealed at the proper time." Inside the longhouse, Solveig, he had learned her name on the second day, moved about with the quiet grace of someone accustomed to observing before acting. She helped with the morning meal preparation, but her hand showed unfamiliarity with the rougher tasks. When she thought herself unobserved, her fingers would trace patterns in the air as if writing invisible words, or she would study the carved post that supported the roof. With the intensity of someone reading a beloved story, the children of the settlement had taken to her immediately, drawn perhaps by the gentle way she spoke to them, never talking down but meeting them at their level with genuine interest. Yesterday, young Astrid had brought her a handful of wildflowers, and Solveig had woven them into a crown with such skill that the other children had begged for their own. The sight had stirred something in Eirik's chest, a warmth he had not felt since losing his own family to the fever. "She watches everything," observed Ingrid, his head thrall woman, as she prepared the morning bread. Not like someone planning mischief, but like someone who needs to understand how the world works around her. And she asks questions, good questions, about how we organize the watch, how we store grain for winter, how we settle disputes between neighbors. These observations troubled and intrigued Eirik in equal measure. What manner of beggar woman understood enough about leadership to ask such questions? What experiences had taught her to observe so carefully? On the third morning, he had found her standing at the eastern window of the longhouse, her hand pressed against the torn piece of blue fabric she kept hidden beneath her plain wool dress. The cloth was fine, finer than anything worn by common folk, and the blue held the deep richness that spoke of expensive dyes. When she noticed his attention, she had quickly hidden the fragment, but not before he glimpsed embroidered silver threads worked into what might have been a royal pattern. "Tell me of your family," he had asked gently, settling beside the fire with his morning ale. Her hands had stilled on the bread she was kneading. "There is little to tell. They are gone." "Gone how?" "Dead." The word fell like a stone into still water. "Murdered." The pain in her voice had been raw enough to quiet his questions, but it had also confirmed his suspicions. This was no ordinary tragedy of common folk. The grief she carried had the weight of losses that echoed through halls of power. Not the simple sorrow of peasants claimed by disease or hard winters. Now, as the fourth morning dawned and the settlement stirred to life around them, Eirik found himself caught between duty and desire, between the safety of his people and the growing certainty that this woman represented far more than a simple act of charity. His crew gathered at the harbor for their planned departure, a trading expedition to the Shetland settlements that would normally fill him with anticipation. Today, the thought of leaving felt like abandoning a post during battle. The woman needed protection, though from what or whom remained unclear. More troubling still, he found himself reluctant to leave her presence, drawn by an attraction that went deeper than her emerging beauty. "Captain," called Eirik Ravenhair, the youngest of his warriors. "The tide turns favorable within the hour. Do we make ready to sail?" The question hung in the salt air like a challenge. Around him, his crew waited with the patience of men accustomed to following orders, but he could see the uncertainty in their eyes. A leader who abandoned profitable ventures for mysterious women would not long command respect or loyalty. Yet, as Eirik looked back toward the longhouse, he saw Solveig emerge into the morning light, and the sight struck him with unexpected force. Dressed in a simple brown wool dress borrowed from Ingrid, her dark hair braided back in the style of a respectable woman, she moved with unconscious dignity across the settlement grounds. When she paused to speak with old Magnus the smithy, offering to help carry water from the well, the gesture revealed both humility and natural authority. Delay the sailing, Eirik decided, his voice carrying the quiet finality his men knew well. 3 more days. Bjorn raised an eyebrow, but nodded acceptance. "And if the men ask why, tell them their captain follows his instincts, as he always has." Eirik's hand tightened on his axe handle. "Those instincts have kept us alive through 17 years of adventures. They will not fail us now." As his crew dispersed to tend to other matters, Eirik remained at the harbor's edge, watching the woman who had appeared in his life like a gift from the gods themselves. Whatever secrets she carried, whatever dangers might follow in her wake, he would meet them as he had met every challenge in his life, with honor, courage, and the strength of the community he had built. The Stormshield axe had protected 3 generations of his family. Perhaps it was time to learn if it could protect the woman who had awakened something in his heart, he thought, lost forever to grief and time. The strangers arrived with the morning tide, their ship cutting through the harbor mist like a blade through silk. Eirik felt the wrongness before he saw them clearly 3 men in a fishing vessel that rode too low for its supposed cargo, their eyes scanning the settlement with the calculating gaze of predators rather than traders. He stood at the harbor's edge, the familiar weight of his axe comforting against his hip, and watched them beach their craft with practiced efficiency. They moved like warriors despite their simple clothes, their hands never straying far from weapons poorly concealed beneath rough cloaks. "Captain," Bjorn appeared at his shoulder, his own hand resting on his sword hilt. "Something feels amiss, indeed." Eirik's voice carried the quiet tension of a man who had survived too many ambushes to ignore his instincts. "Gather the lads, but keep them back. Let's see what these visitors want before we decide how to greet them." The lead stranger stepped onto the dock with confidence that spoke of authority. He was tall and lean, with the pale complexion of someone who spent more time in halls of power than under the open sky. His companions flanked him with military precision, their movements revealing training that no simple fisherman would possess. "Greetings, lord of this settlement," the leader called, his voice carrying the refined accent of nobility. "I am Thorolf, in service to Jarl Magnus of the Northern Reach. We seek information about a woman who may have passed through your lands." Eirik stepped forward, noting how the man's eyes swept the settlement behind him with studied attention. "Information freely given to those who ask with courtesy. What manner of woman do you seek?" "A fugitive," Thorolf replied, his tone hardening slightly. "Dark-haired, green-eyed, traveling alone. She has committed crimes against her rightful lord and must be returned for justice." The description struck Eirik like a physical blow, but years of leadership had taught him to mask his reactions. Behind Thorolf, the 2 companions spread slightly apart, positioning themselves to cut off potential escape routes from the harbor. The movement was subtle, but unmistakable to eyes trained in warfare. "Many women travel our roads," Eirik said carefully. "Perhaps you could be more specific about these crimes?" Thorolf's smile held no warmth. "Theft of royal property, conspiracy against rightful authority," and his voice dropped to carry across the growing crowd of onlookers. "The practice of forbidden arts. Some call it witchcraft." The word fell into the morning air like a stone dropped into calm water, sending ripples of unease through the gathered villagers. Eirik saw old fears flicker across familiar faces, the superstitions that lived in the hearts of even the bravest warriors. "Serious accusations," Eirik observed, his tone remaining neutral despite the growing tension in his chest. "What proof do you offer of these crimes?" "The word of Jarl Magnus should be proof enough for any honest man." Thorolf's hand moved closer to his concealed weapon. "Unless you have reason to doubt the justice of your betters?" The challenge hung between them like drawn steel. Eirik felt the familiar calm that preceded violence, the slowing of time that had saved his life in countless battles. Around the harbor, his people watched with the tension of those who sensed approaching storm. It was then that Solveig appeared. She had emerged from the longhouse to draw water from the well, moving with her usual quiet grace until she spotted the strangers. The pottery vessel slipped from her hands, shattering against the stones as her face went white with terror. For a heartbeat, she stood frozen like a deer that had caught the scent of wolves. Then she ran. "There!" Thorolf's shout shattered the morning peace. "The witch Solveig! Seize her!" The 2 companions moved with deadly efficiency, drawing concealed swords as they pursued their quarry across the settlement grounds. Solveig fled toward the forest edge, her borrowed dress hindering her movement, panic destroying the careful composure she had maintained for days. Eirik's world narrowed to crystal clarity. The woman he had claimed as wife was being hunted like an animal by men who called her witch. Whether she was truly Solveig, whether the accusations held truth, whether she had deceived him, none of it mattered in that moment. She was under his protection. The Stormshield axe sang from its sheath as Eirik moved to intercept the nearest pursuer. "Hold." His voice carried the authority of absolute command. "No blood will be spilled in Bjornvik without my word." The warrior turned with professional speed, his blade coming up to meet Eirik's charge. Steel rang against steel as axe met sword, the impact sending shockwaves up both men's arms. But Eirik had 20 years of experience behind his strike, and the stranger had only desperation. The axe head caught the sword just below the hilt, and Eirik's superior leverage sent the weapon spinning from nerveless fingers. A follow-through brought the flat of the axe against the man's temple, dropping him to the earth with a sound like a sack of grain hitting stone. Behind him, Bjorn and the crew had moved to surround the second pursuer, their own weapons drawn and ready. The man found himself facing 6 armed Vikings with nowhere to run and no hope of victory. "Call off your dogs, Thorolf," Eirik commanded, turning to face the leader while keeping his axe at ready position. "Or discover how we treat those who threaten our people." Thorolf's face twisted with frustrated rage, but he was outnumbered and knew it. "You make a grave mistake, Viking. The woman is a royal fugitive, daughter of the traitor King Hakon. She is wanted for her father's crimes against the realm." The words hit Eirik like a war hammer to the chest. Daughter of King Hakon, the monarch whose death 2 years past had sent shockwaves through the northern kingdoms. If true, the woman he had claimed as wife was not just nobility, but royalty of the highest order, and she was being hunted by those who had likely arranged her father's murder. During the confrontation, Solveig had stumbled near the forest edge, her dress catching on thorny brush. As she struggled to free herself, a small object fell from beneath her clothing, glinting silver in the morning light. One of the village children, young Astrid, ran to help and gasped when she saw what lay on the ground: a pendant. Silver and sapphire, worked with intricate craftsmanship into the shape of a broken crown. Even from a distance, Eirik could see the royal craftsmanship, the kind of treasure that confirmed everything Thorolf had claimed. Solveig Princess Solveig saw the pendant lying exposed and looked up to meet Eirik's eyes across the settlement grounds. In her gaze, he read terror, shame, and desperate hope all warring together. She had been discovered. Her carefully maintained disguise had shattered like the pottery vessel at her feet. "You see?" Thorolf's voice carried triumph mixed with renewed caution. "The crown pendant of the royal house. She cannot deny her identity now." Eirik looked from the pendant to the woman kneeling by the forest edge, then back to the armed stranger who threatened his peace. The choice before him was stark and unforgiving. He could surrender Solveig to these men and return to his simple life of trade and protection. Or he could take a stand that would likely bring war to his doorstep. The Stormshield axe seemed to pulse in his grip, reminding him of the oaths his family had sworn to protect the innocent and defend the weak. Princess or beggar, royal or common, the woman had sought shelter under his roof. She was his responsibility now. "I see a frightened woman who has claimed sanctuary in my hall," Eirik said, his voice carrying across the silent settlement. "Whatever her birth or past, she is under my protection. You will not take her." Thorolf's hand moved to his own sword, but the sight of 30 armed Vikings taking position around the harbor gave him pause. "This is not finished, Stormshield. Jarl Magnus will hear of your defiance. He will come with ships and warriors, and your little settlement will burn. Then we will meet him as we have met all threats," Eirik replied with deadly calm. "With steel and courage." The strangers retreated to their vessel, dragging their unconscious companion with them. As they sailed back into the morning mist, Thorolf's final words carried clearly across the water. "Enjoy your witch while you can, Viking. We will return for what is ours." Solveig remained kneeling by the forest edge, the broken crown pendant clutched in her trembling hands like a piece of her shattered past. When Eirik approached her with gentle steps, she looked up with eyes that held the weight of kingdoms lost and choices made in desperation. "Now you know," she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "I am Solveig Hakon's daughter of a murdered king, hunted by those who would finish what they started. I have brought death to your door." Eirik knelt beside her in the morning grass, his weathered hands reaching out to cover her trembling fingers. "You have brought nothing but honor to my house," he said with quiet conviction. "Princess or peasant, you are my wife before the gods. That bond will not be broken by threats or fear." Around them, the people of Bormvik watched in silence, understanding that their peaceful world had just changed forever. The pendant glinted between Solveig's fingers, a broken crown that would either restore a kingdom or destroy a settlement. The choice had been made. Now came the consequences. The longhouse felt different in the aftermath of revelation, as if the very walls had absorbed the weight of royal secrets. Solveig sat beside the central fire, the broken crown pendant cradled in her palms like a wounded bird. The flames cast dancing shadows across her face, revealing the exhaustion that came from carrying burdens too heavy for anyone's soul. Eirik dismissed his crew with quiet words, sending them to strengthen the settlement's defenses while he remained with the woman, who was no longer simply the beggar he had rescued. Princess Solveig Hakon's daughter, the name carried echoes of songs and stories, tales of King Hakon's wisdom and the tragic end that had befallen the northern kingdom. "Tell me," he said gently, settling across the fire from her. "Tell me all of it." Solveig's fingers traced the broken edges of the crown pendant, and when she spoke, her voice carried the distant quality of someone reliving old nightmares. "My father was a good king. Not perfect, but just. He sought to unite the northern jarls under one banner, to bring peace where there had been only raiding and war." She paused, staring into the flames as if seeing the past play out in their depths. There were those who profited from chaos. Jarl Magnus of the Northern Reach, Jarl Sigurd Ironfist, Earl Gunnar the Cruel. They feared losing their power to a united kingdom. So they conspired. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush as if a dam had burst. Solveig told of the feast that became a slaughter, of trusted allies who revealed themselves as enemies, of her father dying with poisoned wine still wet on his lips. She spoke of her own desperate escape through servant passages, guided by loyal guards who died buying her precious minutes of freedom. "They hunted me like an animal," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "Every settlement, every village, they sent word that the king's daughter must be found, dead or alive, but preferably dead, for a living princess might one day reclaim her throne." Eirik felt anger building in his chest, not just at the betrayal she described, but at the cruelty of forcing a young woman to live as a hunted creature. "How long?" 2 years. 2 years of running, hiding, begging for scraps when I had once dined from silver plates. Her laugh held no humor. "I learned to speak like a common woman, to walk without the bearing of nobility, to make myself invisible to those who might recognize the royal bloodline." From beneath her borrowed dress, Solveig withdrew a folded piece of cloth silk that had once been fine blue, but now showed the wear of careful concealment. When she spread it beside the fire, Eirik could see it was a map, painted in delicate detail with locations marked in silver thread. "My mother gave this to me before she died of the wasting sickness, when I was but 16 winters," Solveig explained. She said it showed the old ways, the paths known only to those who served the royal house in generations past. The map revealed a network of caves, hidden valleys, and ancient runestones scattered across the northern lands. Each location was marked with symbols that spoke of sanctuary and secret alliances. A shadow kingdom that existed alongside the visible world of Jarls and settlements. Safe houses, Eirik realized, studying the intricate markings. Your mother prepared for the possibility of exile. She was wiser than my father in some ways. He trusted too easily, believed that honor in his own heart meant honor in others. Solveig's finger traced one of the silver paths on the map. This led me here, to Bjornvik. I had heard tales of an honorable captain who protected his people, who kept the old ways of guest right and sanctuary. Eirik felt something shift in his understanding. You sought me out deliberately. I sought shelter, she corrected gently. But yes, I came to Bjornvik because I hoped to find safety among honorable people. I never expected, her voice softened. I never expected kindness, or acceptance. Or, she looked up to meet his eyes, to find a man who would claim me as wife without knowing my true worth. The weight of her words settled between them like a bridge being built stone by stone. Eirik reached across the fire to touch her hand, noting how her fingers trembled despite her brave words. Your true worth has nothing to do with your birth, he said with quiet conviction. I have seen how you speak to children, how you help with daily tasks, how you watch over others with gentle concern. That is the measure of a person's value. Outside the longhouse, voices rose in heated discussion as his crew debated the wisdom of harboring a royal fugitive. Eirik could hear Bjorn's steady tones trying to calm younger warriors who spoke of the danger to their families, of the futility of standing against powerful jarls with armies at their command. They are afraid, Solveig observed, hearing the same voices. And they have every right to be. Jarl Magnus commands 300 warriors. Sigurd Ironfist can call upon twice that number. Together with their allies, they could field an army that would crush Bjornvik like an egg beneath a warhammer. Fear is a wise counselor when listened to properly, Eirik replied, but it becomes a poor master when allowed to rule our choices. He stood and moved to the carved chest where he kept his most precious possessions. From within, he withdrew an object wrapped in oiled leather, a runestone, ancient beyond memory, carved with symbols that predated the coming of the White Christ to the northern lands. This belonged to my great-grandfather's great-grandfather, he explained, settling the stone between them. Family legend says it can reveal hidden truths to those brave enough to seek them. Solveig studied the worn carvings, her educated eye recognizing the craftsmanship of the old days. You would have me cast the runes? To see what fate awaits us. I would have us both understand what we face, Eirik said simply. Knowledge shared is burden lessened. She nodded and took the runestone in her hands, closing her eyes as she whispered words in the old tongue, words that called upon the wisdom of gods whose names were older than memory. When she cast the stone, it landed with the primary symbol facing upward, the rune that meant transformation through trial. Strength found in unity. The stone speaks of coming trials, she interpreted, her voice taking on the cadence of ancient prophecies, but also of bonds forged stronger than steel, of victory born from sacrifice willingly given. Eirik nodded, understanding that some knowledge came not through logic, but through faith in forces greater than mortal planning. Then we prepare for trial and trust in the bonds we have built. As if summoned by their words, Bjorn entered the longhouse, his weathered face grave with concern. Captain, the men need answers. Half speak of fighting, half of fleeing. Some even whisper of surrendering the princess to buy peace. And what do you counsel, old friend? Bjorn looked from Eirik to Solveig, taking in the runestone between them and the map spread beside the fire. I counsel that we are Vikings, not sheep. We do not bow to threats or abandon those who seek our protection. His voice hardened with resolve. But if we fight, we must be prepared for the consequences. This will not be a simple raid or border skirmish. This will be war. Solveig folded the silk map carefully, her movements deliberate and purposeful. "There is another choice," she said quietly. "The map shows more than just hiding places. Some of these symbols mark the holdings of nobles who remained loyal to my father, who went into hiding when the conspiracy succeeded." She looked up at both men with growing hope in her eyes. "I am not as friendless as Magnus believes. If we can reach these allies, if we can gather the loyal remnants of my father's kingdom," she touched the broken crown pendant, "perhaps we fight not as one settlement against an army, but as rightful claimants against usurpers." The possibility hung in the air like dawnlight breaking through storm clouds. Eirik felt his warrior's heart respond to the challenge, even as his leader's mind calculated the risks to his people. How long would it take to contact these allies? "With swift messengers and careful planning, perhaps a fortnight," Solveig replied. "But it would mean revealing my survival to more than just Magnus. Once word spreads that King Hakon's daughter lives, there will be no hiding, no retreat to simple anonymity." Eirik stood and moved to the window, looking out over the settlement that had been his life's work. Children played in the afternoon sun, unaware that their world balanced on the edge of a knife. Families went about their daily tasks, trusting in his leadership to keep them safe. The choice before him would echo through generations. The silver ring lay hidden in the folds of Solveig's mother's silk map, so small that Eirik almost missed it when she carefully unfolded the precious cloth for the third time that evening. Only the glint of firelight against metal drew his attention to the delicate band nestled in a secret pocket sewn along the map's edge. "Mother's final gift," Solveig explained, lifting the ring with reverent fingers. "I thought it merely a keepsake until desperation taught me to look closer." The ring appeared simple at first glance, smooth silver, worked with flowing patterns that might have been decorative. But as Solveig pressed a nearly invisible catch along the band, a hidden compartment opened to reveal a tiny scroll of parchment, its surface covered with names written in her mother's careful hand. "Loyal allies," she breathed, unrolling the list with trembling fingers. "Those who served my father in secret, who swore oaths to the royal house that went deeper than politics or convenience." Eirik leaned closer to study the names, recognizing several that carried weight throughout the northern kingdoms. Eirik Bloodaxe of the western fjords, Ingrid Stormdaughter, who ruled the island holdings, Magnus Silvertongue, whose merchant fleet carried more than trade goods between the settlements. "These are not minor nobles seeking advantage," he observed. "These are powers in their own right. My mother was wise in ways my father never fully understood. She knew that true loyalty could not be commanded, only earned through years of trust and mutual respect." Solveig's finger traced each name as if saying a prayer. "If even half of these remain true to their oaths, we would have the foundation of an army," Born finished, having returned from organizing the settlement's defenses. Not enough to face Magnus and his allies in open battle, but sufficient to make them think twice about easy conquest. The three of them spent the evening composing messages, each carefully crafted to identify Solveig without revealing too much to potential enemies. The words had to be coded yet unmistakable to those who knew the royal house's private signs and symbols. As they worked, Eirik found himself impressed by Solveig's understanding of statecraft and the delicate balance of alliance politics. "You learned well at your father's court," he commented as she suggested a particular phrase that would confirm her identity to Eirik Bloodaxe. "I learned by necessity," she replied with quiet sadness. "Father believed peace could be maintained through strength and honor alone. I saw how easily strength could be turned against itself, how honor could become weakness in the hands of those without conscience." The next morning brought the first test of the settlement's new reality. Word had spread through Bjornvik that their captain harbored a royal fugitive, and the people's reactions revealed the full spectrum of human nature under pressure. Some like old Magnus the smith, grumbled about bringing trouble upon peaceful heads. "We came here to escape the wars of great lords," he complained while hammering iron that would become spear points. "Now we invite those wars to our doorstep." Others, particularly the women who had spent time with Solveig, defended her with fierce loyalty. "She helped birth young Astrid's baby brother," declared Helga the healer. "Royal or common, any woman who brings life into the world with gentle hands has earned my respect." The young warriors were divided between excitement at the prospect of glorious battle and concern for the families they had sworn to protect. Eirik watched carefully, noting which men met his eyes with steady confidence, and which avoided his gaze while sharpening weapons with too much enthusiasm. It was during this time of internal tension that the first messenger bird returned from Eirik Bloodaxe. The raven arrived at dawn, a silver band around its leg marking it as coming from the western fjords. Solveig's hand shook as she opened the tiny scroll, her face brightening as she read the coded response. "He remembers his oath," she announced to Eirik and Bjorn. 20 longships and 400 warriors. If we can give him 2 weeks to gather his forces." More responses trickled in over the following days. Ingrid's Stormdaughter confirmed her loyalty with a promise of island strongholds and her feared sea wolves. Magnus Silvertongue offered not just ships but the vast network of information that his merchants gathered from every port and settlement along the northern coasts. But for every affirmative response, there were silences that spoke of changed loyalties or careful neutrality. Some of those her mother had trusted were clearly weighing their options, waiting to see which way the wind would blow before committing to either side. "We cannot count on all of them," Solveig admitted as they tallied their potential allies. "Fear makes cowards of the bravest souls when the stakes grow high enough. Then we plan for what we have, not what we hope for," Eirik replied pragmatically. "How long before Magnus realizes you're gathering support?" "Days, perhaps a week, if we are fortunate," she said. "His spies are everywhere, and our messages cannot be entirely secret if they are to reach their destinations." This knowledge spurred intensive preparations throughout Bjornvik. The settlement transformed from a peaceful trading post into a fortress preparing for siege. Every able-bodied adult learned to handle weapons, while children were taught evacuation routes leading to caves hidden in the coastal cliffs. Solveig proved herself invaluable during these preparations, her knowledge of military strategy complementing Eirik's practical experience. She understood how armies moved, where they would be vulnerable, what supplies they would need. More importantly, she grasped the political dimensions of the coming conflict. "Magnus cannot simply raid and withdraw," she explained while they planned defensive positions. "If he attacks Bjornvik, he commits himself to finishing what he started. A failed assault would encourage other settlements to resist, would make him appear weak to rivals within his own alliance, meaning he will come in strength, prepared for a long siege if necessary," Bjorn concluded grimly. "Or he will try to take us quickly through treachery," Eirik added, his warrior's instincts recognizing the tactical alternatives. "Turn our own people against us, sow discord from within." As if responding to his words, young Eirik Ravenhair approached their council fire with obvious reluctance. The youth had always been eager for adventure, but now uncertainty clouded his features. "Captain," he began hesitantly, "the men are asking questions about whether one woman's life is worth risking all our families." The question hung in the evening air like a challenge to everything Eirik had built his life upon. Around the fire, he could see the weight of leadership pressing down like a physical burden. These were not just soldiers following orders. These were families who had trusted him with their safety and prosperity. "What do you tell them?" Eirik asked quietly. "I tell them, you have never led us astray," Eirik replied with growing confidence. "I tell them the princess has earned her place among us through her own actions, not just her birth." and I tell them that Vikings do not abandon their oaths for the sake of convenience." Solveig looked up from the silver ring she had been turning between her fingers. "Perhaps they should hear that from me directly." The suggestion sparked immediate debate. Bjorn worried about exposing her to potential hostility, while Eirik recognized the political wisdom of allowing the people to see her as a person rather than an abstract symbol of danger. "Tomorrow evening," Eirik decided, "in the Great Hall, before the entire settlement. Let them ask their questions and hear your answers. Let them decide for themselves whether you are worth defending." Solveig nodded with the quiet dignity that had first caught his attention. "And if they choose differently, then we will respect their choice and find another way," Eirik replied. Though privately he doubted his ability to abandon her regardless of popular opinion. As the evening ended, and they prepared for sleep, Solveig touched his arm gently. "Thank you," she said simply, "for giving them the choice and for trusting in their honor." "Honor shared grows stronger," Eirik replied, unconsciously echoing words his father had taught him. "Tomorrow we learn what manner of people we truly are." The silver ring caught the last light of the dying fire, its hidden compartment holding secrets that might save a kingdom or doom a settlement. Either way, the choice would be made by free people acting according to their conscience. Such choices, Eirik reflected, were what separated civilization from mere survival. The raven arrived at dawn with death in its talons. Not the symbolic death of dreams or hopes, but the very real promise of blood spilled and lives ended. The bird landed heavily on the longhouse roof, its black feathers wet with morning dew. A crimson-stained feather tied to its leg with leather cord. Erik retrieved the message while Solveig watched from the doorway, her face pale with recognition. She knew what the bloodied raven feather meant. It was an old sign, used by those who dealt in assassination and terror to announce their intentions to their prey. "What does it say?" she asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer would bring no comfort. Eirik unrolled the small parchment, his weathered face growing grim as he read the carefully penned words. "Magnus grows impatient. He offers terms for your surrender-safe passage for all of Bornvik if we deliver you to his justice within 7 days. And if we refuse, fire and sword," Eirik replied simply. "He promises to leave no stone standing upon another, no soul alive to remember this place ever existed." The threat was not merely political posturing. Magnus had earned his reputation through the ashes of settlements that had dared oppose him, through the silence of families who had learned too late that defiance carried a price, measured in blood. Solveig took the parchment from his hands, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her voice as she read the formal words that promised her death and threatened everyone she had come to care about. "He writes like a merchant negotiating grain prices," she observed with bitter humor, "as if murder were simply another transaction." "Perhaps to him it is," Eirik replied, watching her carefully. The woman who had once begged for scraps now faced threats that would break lesser spirits. Yet she stood straight and read her potential death sentence with the composure of a queen. The bloodied feather became a source of whispered conversation throughout Bjornvik. Some saw it as an omen of disaster, while others viewed it as proof that their enemies feared them enough to resort to intimidation. The settlement buzzed with nervous energy as people went about their daily tasks while glancing frequently toward the harbor, expecting to see hostile sails at any moment. It was during these tense days that Solveig's nightmares returned with renewed fury. Eirik woke on the third night to find her sitting by the dying fire, her face streaked with tears she would not acknowledge, her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles showed white in the dim light. "The dreams?" he asked gently, settling beside her on the rough wooden bench. "Father dies differently each time," she whispered, staring into the glowing embers. "Sometimes poison, sometimes steel, sometimes fire. But always betrayal, always trust rewarded with death." Her voice broke slightly, and always my fault for surviving when he could not. Eirik understood the weight of survivor's guilt, had carried his own burden since the fever took his wife and child while he remained healthy. The dead do not blame the living for drawing breath, he said with quiet conviction. They ask only that we make their sacrifice meaningful. How can his death be meaningful if I accomplish nothing but bringing destruction upon innocent people? The question emerged as raw pain given voice. Before Eirik could answer, young Astrid burst through the longhouse door, her face bright with excitement despite the early hour. "Princess, come quickly. The sea wolves are returning." They followed the child to the harbor, where the settlement was gathering to watch a magnificent sight unfold in the morning mist. 3 longships cut through the water with predatory grace, their dragon prows gleaming with fresh paint, and their crews singing battle songs that carried across the waves like thunder. Ingrid Stormdaughter stood at the prow of the lead vessel, her gray hair streaming behind her like a war banner, her weathered hands gripping a ship's rail that had been carved with the intertwined serpents of her house. At 60 winters, she remained formidable enough to command respect from warriors half her age and cunning enough to navigate the treacherous currents of northern politics. "Solveig Hakonsdottir." Ingrid's voice rang across the harbor as her ship scraped against the dock. "I kept my oath to your father. My sea wolves are yours to command." The arrival of Ingrid's forces transformed the mood in Bjornvik from fearful preparation to cautious optimism. Her warriors were veterans of countless battles, men and women who had learned their trade in the unforgiving waters, where weakness meant death and strength was the only currency that mattered. But even as hope grew, new challenges emerged. Housing and feeding 90 additional warriors strained the settlement's resources, while integrating their different fighting styles with Bjornvik's defenses required careful diplomacy. Some of Ingrid's crew looked upon the peaceful settlement with barely concealed contempt, viewing the farmers and craftsmen as soft prey unworthy of protection. "Your people lack the hardness needed for real war," observed Gunnar Scarface, Ingrid's second in command, as he watched Bjornvik's militia practice with spear and shield. "They fight like men defending their homes rather than warriors seeking glory." "Because that is exactly what they are," Eirik replied evenly. "Men defending their homes fight with desperation that glory seekers cannot match." The comment sparked heated discussion among the gathered warriors, revealing fundamental differences in philosophy between those who live for battle and those who fought only when forced. Solveig found herself mediating these tensions, drawing upon diplomatic skills learned at her father's court to bridge the gap between different military cultures. "Each warrior brings strength," she told the assembled fighters during an evening meeting. "The sea wolves bring experience and fearlessness, while Bjornvik's defenders bring knowledge of the terrain and unbreakable motivation to protect what they love. Together, we are stronger than the sum of our parts." Her words carried weight because she spoke as one who understood both perspectives. She had grown up among court warriors who fought for honor and advancement. Yet she had spent 2 years living among common people who valued safety and prosperity above martial glory, as if testing their newfound unity. Raiders struck the outlying farms that very night. A dozen men bearing Magnus's banner burned 3 grain stores and killed 2 farmers who tried to resist. They escaped before the combined forces could respond. But their message was clear. The war had begun in earnest. Eirik found Solveig standing over the body of Eirik the farmer, a man whose only crime had been choosing to raise sheep rather than carry sword. Her face showed the controlled fury of someone learning that leadership meant accepting responsibility for every death that followed her choices. "This is what Magnus offers," she said quietly. "Death for the innocent, suffering for those who never asked to be part of his war for power. Then we ensure their deaths have meaning," Eirik replied, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We make certain that Magnus pays for every life he takes." The bloodied raven feather fluttered from its post on the longhouse wall, a constant reminder of promises made by enemies who dealt in terror. But around it now hung the banners of Ingrid's sea-wolves and the simple emblems of Bjornvik's defenders. Symbols of alliance forged not through fear, but through shared purpose. As night fell over the settlement, scouts reported signal fires burning in the distance. Magnus's army was gathering, preparing for the assault that would determine whether a princess reclaimed her throne or a peaceful settlement learned the price of defying power. The war for Solveig's crown had begun, and there would be no retreat for any of them. The ancestral war horn had not sounded in living memory, its bronze surface green with age and its carved runes barely visible beneath decades of careful preservation. Eirik's grandfather had carried it during the great raids against the Danish kings, and his great-grandfather before that had blown it to rally the clans against Saxon invaders. Now it hung heavy in Eirik's hands as he stood atop the highest watchtower, weighing the decision that would echo across generations. Magnus's forces had struck 3 more farms during the night, each attack more brazen than the last. The raiders no longer fled immediately after their destruction. They lingered to be seen, to let fear spread through the countryside like poison through clear water. Smoke still rose from burning grain stores, visible reminders that the enemy grew bolder with each passing hour. "The horn calls for more than warriors," Bjorn observed, joining Eirik on the tower platform. "It calls for commitment." Once sounded, every settlement within hearing must choose between alliance and neutrality, or between honor and survival, Eirik replied grimly. The choice would force his neighbors to declare themselves, to risk Magnus's wrath for the sake of an ancient code that many considered outdated in these practical times. Below them, Solveig moved through the settlement with quiet purpose, her transformation complete from hunted fugitive to acknowledged leader. She spoke with each family about evacuation plans, listened to concerns from worried mothers, and offered reassurance to children who sensed the adult world's growing tension without understanding its source. "She has found her true calling," Ingrid's Stormdaughter commented, approaching the tower with the measured stride of someone who had commanded respect for 40 years. "Your princess was born for this, not to sit safely in throne rooms, but to stand with people who risk everything for principle." Eirik had reached the same conclusion through watching Solveig's growth over the past weeks. The frightened woman who had once hidden in ragged clothes had emerged as someone capable of inspiring loyalty through example rather than birthright. When young mothers sought her advice, when warriors listened to her tactical suggestions, when even Ingrid's hardened sea-wolves nodded approval at her words, it spoke of natural leadership that transcended royal blood. "The horn?" Bjorn prompted gently. Eirik raised the ancient bronze instrument to his lips, feeling the weight of generations in its familiar curves. The sound that emerged was deep and mournful, carrying across the fjord with the resonance of whale song or distant thunder. 3 long blasts followed by 3 short, the traditional call for aid against overwhelming odds. The sound echoed from cliff faces and rolled across the water, reaching settlements scattered throughout the coastal region. Within hours, answering horns began to sound from distant watchtowers as communities made their choices. Some remained silent, their neutrality speaking louder than words, but others responded with the measured cadence that promised warriors and supplies. "Eirik Bloodaxe sends word from the western fjords," reported young Eirik Ravenhair, reading from a message that had arrived with exhausted riders. 20 longships departed at dawn, carrying 400 warriors and supplies for extended siege. More messages followed throughout the day. Magnus Silvertongue's merchant vessels were converging from every direction, their holds filled not with trade goods, but with weapons, armor, and veteran fighters whose loyalty had been purchased with more than gold. Small settlements throughout the region sent what forces they could spare, a dozen warriors here, a score there, each contribution representing families choosing principle over safety. But Magnus's response was swift and brutal. Before sunset, smoke rose from settlements that had answered Eirik's call, their buildings burning as punishment for defying the established order. The message was clear. Those who stood with Solveig would pay for their choice regardless of the conflict's outcome. 30 dead in Oakenford, Ingrid reported grimly after her scouts returned with intelligence. Magnus sent 200 warriors to make an example. They killed every fighting man and burned the longhouse with the families inside. The news struck Solveig like a physical blow. She stood silently for long moments, staring toward the distant smoke that marked another community's destruction, her hands clenched at her sides with barely controlled rage. "This ends when Magnus is dead," she said finally, her voice carrying a hardness that reminded everyone she was King Hakon's daughter. "Not when I surrender, not when we negotiate terms, but when the man who murders innocents faces justice." Her words sparked discussion among the gathered leaders about strategy and timing. Some favored immediate attack while their forces remained scattered, arguing that aggressive action might prevent further massacres. Others counseled patience, pointing out that hasty assault against prepared positions typically ended in disaster. "Magnus wants us angry," Eirik observed during the evening council. "Anger makes warriors careless, causes them to abandon strategy for the satisfaction of striking back immediately." "Then what do you suggest?" demanded Gunnar Scarface, Ingrid's lieutenant, whose own village had been among those burned. "That we sit behind our walls while he slaughters our families?" Solveig unfolded her mother's map, spreading the silk across the rough wooden table where they had been planning defensive positions. "We use what Magnus doesn't expect, the old knowledge. The hidden paths that armies cannot follow." Her finger traced silver threads that marked ancient routes through the coastal mountains, paths known only to those who had served the royal house for generations. These passages connect every major settlement along the coast. Small groups can move unseen while armies struggle through obvious approaches. Harassment, Bjorn realized, understanding the tactical implications. Strike his supply lines, attack isolated units, force him to spread his strength, protecting every approach. Exactly. Magnus commands superior numbers, but numbers become weakness when they cannot be concentrated effectively. Solveig's strategic mind was working now, drawing upon lessons learned through years of studying her father's military campaigns. "We make him fight our war on our terms." The plan that emerged required careful coordination between multiple groups operating independently. While the main force defended Bjornvik, smaller units would use the secret paths to attack Magnus's supporters throughout the region. It was dangerous work that required absolute trust between leaders who had known each other for mere weeks. "The Horn united us," Eirik said as they concluded their planning. "Now we discover whether unity can overcome superior numbers." As night settled over Bjornvik, the settlement buzzed with quiet activity. Weapons were sharpened, supplies distributed, and final letters written to family members who might never see their authors again. The war horn stood silent now, having done its work, but its bronze surface seemed to gleam with reflected firelight, as if accepting responsibility for the choices it had inspired. Solveig found Eirik standing guard at the harbor's edge, watching for signs of approaching enemies. The woman who had once trembled at shadows now moved with the confident grace of someone who had found her true purpose. "Do you regret sounding the horn?" she asked quietly. "I regret the necessity," he replied honestly, "but not the choice. Some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. Even if the cost includes Bjornvik itself." Eirik considered the question seriously before answering. A settlement is buildings and walls. A community is people and principles. Magnus can destroy the first, but only we can abandon the second. Above them, the ancestral horn caught moonlight along its ancient curves, A reminder that every generation faced moments when principle and survival stood in opposition. The choices made in such moments define not just individual character, but the legacy passed to children who would inherit either freedom or the bitter knowledge that their parents had chosen. Safety over honor. The horn had sounded its call. Now came the test of whether those who answered possessed the courage to pay the price their principles demanded. The marriage contract lay hidden beneath the false bottom of Eirik's most private chest, its parchment yellowed with age and its seal bearing the mark of King Hakon himself. Solveig stared at the document with growing comprehension and mounting fury, the carefully penned words rewriting everything she thought she understood about her rescue and the man she had come to love. "You know," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "From the very beginning, you knew exactly who I was." Eirik stood motionless beside the open chest, the weight of 2 years' deception settling upon his shoulders like a burial shroud. The contract bore dates that predated her arrival in Bjornvik by months, its terms negotiated through secret correspondence with agents loyal to the murdered king. "Your father feared this day would come," he said quietly, his words carrying the exhaustion of secrets too long kept. He suspected the conspiracy against him but could not identify all the traitors. "So he made arrangements for your protection, should the worst happen." The document detailed everything with legal precision: how Eirik Stormshield would be granted lands and titles in exchange for a marriage contract that would place Solveig under his protection, how the union would be binding before both Norse law and the gods, how specific phrases spoken in public would activate clauses that had been prepared months in advance. "The beggar woman at the harbor," Solveig said, her understanding deepening with each revelation. "You were waiting for me." "Waiting and watching," Eirik confirmed. "Your father's agent sent word when you escaped the capital, described the route you would likely take to reach safety. I have been your protector for 2 years without your knowledge, ensuring you reached friendly territory alive." The implications struck her like physical blows. Every kindness he had shown, every moment of apparent spontaneous compassion, every word of love spoken in the darkness of their shared bed, all of it built upon a foundation of royal obligation and political calculation. "The torn blue fabric I carried," she continued, pieces of the deception falling into place. "It was a signal, wasn't it? Something your agents told you to watch for. A piece of your mother's court dress, yes. The final confirmation that you were indeed King Hakon's daughter and not some clever impostor seeking to claim royal protection." Solveig turned away from him, moving to the window where she could stare out at the settlement that had become her sanctuary. Children played in the afternoon sun, unaware that their princes had just learned her entire life had been choreographed by men who moved people like pieces on a game board. "Was any of it real?" she asked without looking back. "The marriage declaration before your crew, the protection you offered, the tenderness you showed when I wept for my father? Everything after the contract was fulfilled," Eirik said, his voice growing urgent with the need to make her understand. "The law required me to claim you as wife, to offer protection under ancient guest right. But what grew between us afterward that was never planned, never commanded by king or contract?" She faced him then, her green eyes bright with unshed tears and barely controlled rage. How convenient that love should bloom so perfectly within the boundaries of political necessity. Convenient, perhaps, but no less real for being so. He stepped toward her and stopped as she raised her hand in warning. "I will not claim that duty did not bring us together, Solveig. But duty alone could not have made me willing to risk my people's lives, to sound the war horn that calls down destruction upon everything I have built." The marriage contract contained provisions that chilled her blood-detailed contingencies for her death, inheritance laws that would place any children under Eirik's protection, regardless of her survival, of even clauses governing how her body should be treated if she died before reclaiming her throne. It read like a merchant's agreement for purchasing livestock rather than a union between two people. "My father sold me," she said, the bitter truth settling like poison in her mouth. "Sold me like a prize mare to be bred for political advantage. He protected you the only way he knew how," Eirik countered, though his defense lacked conviction. Kings live in worlds where personal desires serve political necessities. He chose the best man available to guard your life and honor. Did he also choose the moment you would reveal this truth? Was my growing trust part of the plan? Time to ensure maximum compliance when greater deceptions became necessary? Eirik's silence answered more clearly than words could have. The contract included detailed instructions about revelation timing, suggesting that honesty should be deployed only when circumstances demanded absolute trust between the contracting parties. "The raid on your supply convoy 3 days ago." Solveig continued as understanding dawned. "You knew Magnus would attack there because your agents told you his plans. How long have you been playing both sides of this war?" "Never both sides," Eirik said firmly. "Always your father's side, even after his death. The information network he built continues to serve those loyal to his memory and committed to your restoration." She moved to the fire, holding the marriage contract toward the flames as if to burn away the deception it represented. But practical wisdom stayed her hand. The document might be built on lies, but it also provided legal authority that could prove crucial in the battles ahead. "Does Bjorn know?" she asked without turning around. "Bjorn has served my family for 17 years. He knows when to ask questions and when to accept that some knowledge comes with prices too high for honest men to pay." "And Ingrid? Did she join our cause because of my royal blood, or because her old friend Eirik called in debts owed from years of profitable partnership?" Again, his silence provided the answer she dreaded. The alliances that had seemed to form through natural loyalty and shared principle were revealed as obligations fulfilled and favors returned. Even her growing confidence in her own leadership abilities now seemed suspect. How much had been genuine development, and how much careful manipulation by advisors who knew exactly which strings to pull? "I need time," she said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. "Time to understand what is real and what has been performance." "We may not have time," Eirik replied, producing another document from the chest. Magnus moved faster than anticipated. "Our scouts report his main force will reach Bjornvik within 2 days, not the week we expected." The second parchment bore fresher ink and more urgent handwriting. Intelligence gathered through the same network that had orchestrated her protection now warned of immediate danger. Magnus had learned of their alliance building and decided to strike before their reinforcements could fully organize. "So even this revelation is time for military necessity," Solveig observed with bitter humor. "You need my cooperation for the coming battle. So you provide just enough truth to ensure compliance without allowing time for me to process the betrayal. I need you to trust me despite having every reason not to," Eirik admitted with startling honesty. "I need the woman who has earned loyalty through her own actions, not the princess who commands obedience through her bloodline." She studied his weathered face in the firelight, searching for signs of the man she thought she had come to know beneath the political operator he had revealed himself to be. The marriage contract trembled in her hands like a poisonous snake that could bite or be mastered, depending upon how carefully it was handled. "Trust," she repeated slowly. "You ask for trust from someone who has just learned that her entire adult life has been orchestrated by others." "I ask for partnership," Eirik corrected, "between equals who choose to stand together despite the circumstances that brought them to this moment." Outside the longhouse, the sounds of military preparation continued as warriors made ready for the approaching battle. Whether Solveig chose forgiveness or condemnation, whether she could find a way to separate the man from his mission, the war would continue. Magnus would arrive with fire and sword, and the choices made in this room would determine whether They faced him as allies or as strangers bound together by nothing more than legal documents and political necessity. The forged marriage contract had revealed the foundation of lies beneath their relationship. But it had also provided something unexpected, the opportunity to choose each other freely. Knowing the full truth of how they had been brought together and what forces sought to keep them apart. In the end, that choice would prove more binding than any contract witnessed by kings or gods. King Hakon's seal ring lay heavy in Eirik's weathered palm, its gold surface worn smooth by generations of royal hands that had shaped the fate of kingdoms. The massive ring bore the entwined serpents of the royal house, their emerald eyes glinting in the pre-dawn light as he approached the place where Solveig stood watching the harbor for signs of approaching enemies. "This belonged to your father," he said quietly, extending the ring toward her with both hands in the gesture reserved for presenting sacred objects. "I was to return it only when you were ready to claim what it represents." Solveig stared at the seal ring, as if seeing a ghost materialized from memory. Her fingers trembled as she took the heavy band, feeling the weight of authority that had once commanded armies and shaped laws throughout the northern kingdoms. The ring was more than jewelry. It was the physical symbol of legitimate rule, the artifact that transformed a hunted exile into a rightful queen. "He gave this to you before the feast," she whispered, understanding flooding her features. "He knew they would try to kill him that night." "Your father was many things, but never a fool," Eirik confirmed. He suspected the conspiracy, but could not identify all the traitors without triggering the very coup he feared. "So he prepared for his own death, ensuring that you would have both protection and legitimacy when the time came to reclaim your inheritance." The ring slipped easily onto Solveig's finger, fitting as perfectly as if it had been crafted for her hand rather than inherited from generations of kings. As the gold settled into place, something fundamental shifted in her bearing. The uncertainty that had plagued her since learning of the marriage contract's deception seemed to fall away, replaced by the quiet authority that came with accepting one's true destiny. "Father always said the crown chooses its bearer," she murmured, studying the serpents that seemed to move in the flickering torchlight. "I thought it was merely poetry until now." Around them, Bjornvik bustled with the controlled urgency of final preparations. The settlement had transformed from peaceful trading post to military fortress in the space of a fortnight, its wooden walls reinforced with earthworks and its harbor protected by chains stretched between massive posts. Every able-bodied adult knew their role in the coming battle, while children and the elderly had been evacuated to caves hidden in the coastal cliffs. Magnus, Silvertongue's merchant fleet, had arrived during the night, their ships joining Eirik Bloodaxe's vessels to create an impressive naval force. But even combined, their strength paled beside the armada that scouts reported gathering beyond the northern headlands. Magnus the Cruel commanded 200 ships carrying 8,000 warriors, a force large enough to crush any single settlement through sheer numbers alone. "We cannot win through strength," Bjorn observed as he joined their morning council. "Even with all our allies, we face odds of 3-1. "Then we do not fight their battle," Solveig replied, her strategic mind working with the clarity that came from accepting her role as rightful queen rather than protected exile. "We force them to fight ours." The seal ring seemed to lend weight to her words as she outlined the plan that had crystallized during her sleepless night. Instead of waiting for Magnus to choose the time and manner of assault, they would strike first, using the secret paths mapped in her mother's silk. Small forces would hit supply lines and isolated camps while the main army was still assembling, forcing the enemy to fight a defensive war against opponents who could appear and disappear at will. "It requires absolute coordination," Eirik Bloodaxe warned, his scarred face showing the skepticism of a veteran who had seen elaborate plans crumble under battlefield conditions. "One mistimed attack, one failed communication, and our scattered forces become easy prey for organized pursuit. Then we ensure perfect timing, Solveig said with quiet confidence. The same network that protected me for 2 years will coordinate our strikes. My father's agents know these waters and hidden paths better than Magnus's spies ever could. Eirik watched her transformation with wonder and growing respect. The frightened refugee who had hidden in Beggar's rags had become a queen worthy of the title, someone who could inspire loyalty through competence rather than commanding it through birthright. When she spoke of strategy and timing, seasoned warriors leaned forward to catch every word. When she expressed confidence in dangerous plans, doubt seemed to evaporate from the assembled leaders. But beyond her tactical brilliance, Eirik saw something else, the gradual rebuilding of trust between them. The revelation of the marriage contract had shattered her faith in his motives. But watching him return her father's ring without reservation, seeing him accept her authority even when it contradicted his own preferences, had begun to restore belief in the man beneath the political operator. "There is something else," she said, as the war council concluded and the various leaders departed to oversee final preparations. "Something that must be settled between us before the battle begins." Eirik nodded, understanding that their personal conflict could not be allowed to fester while they faced external threats. They walked in silence to the small grove where Bjornvik's people held their most sacred ceremonies, the place where oaths were sworn before witnesses both mortal and divine. "I have spent the night wrestling with anger," Solveig began, her voice carrying the weight of careful thought. "Anger at deception, at being moved like a game piece, at discovering that what I believed was choice was actually obligation." "Your anger is justified," Eirik replied honestly. "I should have told you the truth from the beginning, regardless of the contract's requirements." "Perhaps, but I have also realized something important." She touched the seal ring, drawing strength from its familiar weight. "My father did not sell me to you. He entrusted me to the one man in all the northern kingdoms who would honor both the letter and spirit of his charge. You could have treated me as valuable property to be protected but not respected. Instead, you showed me kindness that no contract required and patience that no law demanded." The words fell between them like seeds planted in fertile ground. Eirik felt hope stirring in his chest, carefully controlled, but genuine nonetheless. "When you declared me your wife before your crew," Solveig continued, "you knew it would activate clauses that bound you to my protection regardless of personal cost. But when you chose to sound the war horn that called for aid, when you risked everything you had built for a woman you barely knew, that was not duty. That was choice. It was love," Eirik said simply. "Love that began with duty, perhaps, but grew into something that no contract could contain or control." She stepped closer, her hands reaching out to frame his weathered face with gentle fingers. "Then let us choose each other again, freely and completely. Not as king's daughter and loyal protector, not as political allies bound by necessity, but as woman and man who have found something worth defending together. Before the gods and in sight of all who would witness," Eirik replied, understanding that she proposed far more than personal reconciliation. "A true marriage, entered willingly by both parties." "A true marriage," she confirmed, "and a true partnership between equals who choose to face the future side by side." The ceremony that followed was simple but profound. With Born and Ingrid as witnesses, with the seal ring gleaming on Solveig's finger and Eirik's ancestral axe laid across their joined hands, they spoke vows that came from the heart rather than from legal documents. The words they exchanged promised not just love and loyalty, but shared responsibility for the decisions that would shape both their personal future and the fate of everyone who had chosen to follow them. When the brief ceremony concluded, they found themselves facing not just the prospect of immediate battle, but the deeper challenge of ruling together. The seal ring marked Solveig as rightful queen, but effective leadership would require both of them to balance authority and consultation, to blend her royal prerogatives with his practical experience. "Magnus will be here by evening," the worm reported as they return to the settlement proper. Our scouts confirm his main force is less than 10 leagues away, moving with the confidence of those who expect easy victory. Then we begin the education of a tyrant, Solveig replied, her voice carrying the steel that had made her father a feared negotiator. He expects to find a frightened girl hiding behind borrowed protection. Instead, he will face a queen who has chosen her battles and her allies with equal care. The seal ring caught the afternoon light as she gestured toward the harbor where their combined fleets waited. Ships from a dozen settlements, warriors who had answered the call of duty and honor, leaders who had chosen principle over safety, all of it representing the power of legitimate authority exercised with wisdom and courage. Tonight we feast, Eirik announced to the assembled warriors, his voice carrying clearly across the settlement. Tomorrow we fight, but today we celebrate the marriage of a queen who has earned her crown through trial, and the alliance that will restore justice to lands too long cursed by tyranny. The cheer that rose from hundreds of throats spoke of more than martial enthusiasm. It carried the hope of people who had found something worthy of the ultimate sacrifice, a cause that transformed individual warriors into something greater than the sum of their parts. As evening approached and enemy sails appeared on the horizon, King Hakon's seal ring gleamed with reflected firelight, ready to mark the documents that would either restore a rightful kingdom or serve as final testament to the courage of those who had dared to dream of justice. The ancient shield bore the royal arms of King Hakon's house, two serpents intertwined around a crown. Their scales worked in silver against a field of deep blue that matched the color of Solveig's torn cloak fragment. She lifted it from the longhouse wall where it had waited through 2 years of exile, feeling the weight of destiny settle across her arm like the touch of ancestral spirits. "It was your great-grandmother's," Eirik explained as he helped adjust the leather straps to fit her smaller frame. Queen Astrid's shield maiden, who fought beside her husband in the Great War against the Saxon kingdoms. "Your father gave it to me for safekeeping, saying that one day his daughter would need more than legal documents to reclaim her throne." The shield felt alive in her hands, its surface scarred by battles fought decades before her birth, yet still solid enough to turn aside sword and spear. When she raised it before the assembled defenders of Bjornvik, a cheer rose from hundreds of throats, warriors recognizing not just a symbol of royal authority, but a declaration that their queen would stand with them in the coming storm. Magnus's fleet filled the harbor mouth like a plague of black ravens, their dragon prows cutting through morning mist as 8,000 warriors prepared for what their commander expected to be a simple massacre. The tyrant himself stood at the prow of his flagship, his gold-trimmed armor glinting in the dawn light as he surveyed what he believed would be an easy conquest. "Solveig Hakon's daughter," his voice carried clearly across the water, amplified by the natural acoustics of the fjord. "I offer you one final chance to surrender yourself and spare these innocent people the consequences of your foolish defiance." Solveig stepped forward to the harbor's edge, the royal shield blazing with reflected sunlight as she raised it high for all to see. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of legitimate rulership backed by righteous cause. "I am Solveig, daughter of King Hakon, rightful queen of the northern lands." The words rang across the water like a war cry. "I do not surrender to murderers and usurpers. I do not bow to those who kill the innocent to steal what they could never earn through honor." The response from her own forces was thunderous weapons clashed against shields in the ancient rhythm of approval, while voices roared defiance at the assembled tyrants. But Magnus's reply came not in words, but in action, his signal flags ordering the first wave of longships toward the defended harbor. The battle began with a rain of arrows, black shafts whistling overhead as Magnus's archers sought to clear the docks of defenders. Solveig crouched behind her ancestral shield, feeling iron points strike its surface with impacts that jarred her arm but could not penetrate the masterwork construction of royal Almorsmus, beside her. Eirik commanded the defensive response with the calm precision of a veteran who had survived countless battles. "Loose!" he commanded, and their own archers sent a devastating volley into the approaching boats, dropping dozens of invaders into the cold. Fjord water. The first longships reached the harbor chains that Bjornvik's defenders had stretched between massive posts. Some attackers tried to break through by force, their ships splintering against iron links forged by the finest smiths in the region. Others attempted to land warriors who could cut the barriers from shore, only to meet spear walls commanded by Ingrid's sea wolves. "They test our defenses," Solveig observed, watching the tactical pattern emerge from apparent chaos. "Magnus seeks to learn our strength before committing his main force. Then we teach him costly lessons," Eirik replied grimly. Signaling for the deployment of their secret weapon small boats, hidden in caves along the coastline, now emerging to attack the enemy fleet's flanks, using the tide pools and rocky channels that larger vessels could not navigate. The flanking maneuver caught Magnus's forces by surprise. Their attention focused on the harbor defenses, while Bjornvik's raiders struck from unexpected directions. 3 enemy longships burst into flames as fire arrows found their pitch-sealed hulls, while others found themselves taking on water from holes chopped below the waterline by warriors who knew every current and hidden rock in their home waters. But the enemy's numbers told their own story. For every ship damaged or destroyed, 2 more took its place, fresh crews eager for the plunder that victory would bring. Magnus had not built his reputation through caution. He commanded through overwhelming force, applied with brutal efficiency. The royal shield took another heavy blow as his spear thrust nearly penetrated Solveig's guard. She responded with a sword stroke that opened the attacker's throat, her movements guided by training that had begun in her father's court and been honed through 2 years of desperate survival. Around her, the battle raged with increasing intensity as more enemy warriors reached the docks and began establishing footholds on Bjornvik soil. The carefully planned defensive positions held, but barely, and she could see exhaustion beginning to tell on fighters who had been standing ready since before dawn. "The signal," Eirik called, pointing toward the hills where smoke columns rose in the pattern that meant their allied forces were in position. "It's time." Solveig raised the royal shield high overhead, its ancient symbols catching the light like a beacon visible across the entire battlefield. The sight galvanized her followers while striking doubt into enemy hearts. Here was no frightened refugee hiding behind borrowed protection, but a queen who had claimed her birthright and would defend it with her life. The real battle was about to begin. Magnus, the cruel sword, shattered against Eirik's ancestral axe with a sound like breaking thunder, the blade that had drunk the blood of innocent farmers, proving no match for steel forged in honor and tempered by righteous purpose. The tyrant staggered backward, staring at the broken hilt in his hands while the axe head gleamed with reflected firelight from the burning ships that littered the harbor. "Impossible," Magnus breathed, his confidence cracking like ice under spring sun. "No common Viking carries weapons that can break Toledo steel." "I am no common Viking," Eirik replied grimly, advancing with the measured steps of a hunter who had cornered dangerous prey. "I am Eirik Stormshield, sworn protector of the rightful queen, and this axe has drunk the blood of better men than you." The single combat had begun when Magnus, seeing his carefully planned assault dissolving into chaos, had called for the ancient right of champions. His strategy had been sound: defeat the enemy leader in personal combat and watch their resistance crumble. But he had underestimated both the skill of his opponent and the strategic brilliance of the queen he sought to capture. Around them, the battle raged with desperate intensity as Solveig's coordinated counterattack struck Magnus's forces from every direction simultaneously. The secret mountain paths had delivered allied warriors exactly where they were needed most, while the enemy found themselves fighting a war on multiple fronts against opponents who knew every stone and tide pool of the contested ground. Eirik Blood Axe's ships had emerged from hidden coves to attack the enemy fleet's rear. Their crews trained in the brutal close quarters fighting that turned sea battles into floating slaughterhouses. Magnus Silvertongue's merchant vessels proved to be disguised warships, their holds disgorging veteran fighters who fell upon confused enemies with the fury of men defending their chosen queen. But it was Solveig herself who had turned the tide of battle through tactical genius that would have made her father proud. While Magnus focused his attention on the harbor defenses, she had used the ancient runestone paths to position forces where they could strike his supply lines, his command structure, and his reserves all at once. "You cannot win," Magnus snarled. Drawing a hidden dagger as his broken sword proved useless. "Kill me, and my allies will burn every settlement from here to the ice fields. Surrender now, and I will grant mercy to your followers." "Mercy from you?" Solveig's voice cut through the battle noise like a blade through silk. She stood behind Magnus, her royal shield gleaming and her sword point resting against his neck. "The same mercy you showed the farmers of Oakenford? The same mercy you granted my father at his final feast?" The tyrant spun to face her, his eyes widening as he realized the trap had closed around him. While he had focused on Eirik's axe, the queen had used the chaos of combat to position herself for the killing stroke. The dagger in his hand seemed pitiful against the ancient shield that had turned aside the weapons of kings. "You were supposed to die with your father," Magnus whispered, fear finally penetrating his arrogance. "The poison should have claimed you both that night. Instead, it taught me the price of trusting those who speak of honor while harboring betrayal in their hearts." Solveig replied coldly, "Your conspiracy dies with you." The broken sword fragments lay scattered on the blood-stained stones like the remnants of Magnus's ambitions. His weapon had shattered not through accident, but through the meeting of inferior craft with superior purpose. Corruption striking against integrity and finding itself wanting. Magnus's final desperate lunge ended as it had to. His dagger turned aside by the royal shield, while Solveig's blade found the gap between his armor plates with the precision of justice finally served. The tyrant fell without dignity, his golden armor splattered with mud, and his death witnessed by the very people he had sought to terrorize into submission. With their leader's death, the enemy forces began to waver. Some fled toward their ships, seeking escape from a battle that had turned decisively against them. Others threw down their weapons and begged for the mercy their commander had never shown. A few fought on with desperate fury, but isolated groups could not stand against the coordinated assault that pressed them from every direction. Eirik stood over Magnus's cooling corpse, his axe still gleaming with the righteousness of its purpose. The weapon that had protected 3 generations of his family had proven worthy of defending a queen who had earned her crown through courage rather than inheriting it through blood alone. "It is finished," he said simply, though the words carried echoes of ancient prophecies fulfilled and justice restored to lands too long cursed by tyranny. Solveig lowered the royal shield, its surface scarred by the impacts of a dozen weapons, but still bearing the serpent arms of her house with pride unmarred by battle. Around them, the sounds of combat faded as victory became undeniable and resistance collapsed like a dam broken by flood waters. The broken enemy sword lay among the harbor stones, its fragments gleaming like scattered stars fallen from heaven. No smith would reforge that blade. No warrior would wield it again in service to corruption and cruelty. Magnus the Cruel was dead, his conspiracy shattered, and the rightful queen stood ready to reclaim a kingdom that had waited 2 long years for justice to return from exile. The new crown bore no resemblance to the ornate circlets worn by the ancient kings. Its simple design, crafted from silver and iron by the finest smiths of Bjornvik rather than imported from distant courts that dealt in vanity more than substance. Each element had been chosen with care: silver from the coastal mines that fed the settlement's prosperity, iron from weapons willingly donated by warriors who had fought for the right to forge their own destiny, Solveig studied her reflection in the still harbor water as the crown settled upon her dark hair. Its weight both lighter and heavier than she had expected. Lighter because it represented choice rather than obligation. Heavier because it carried the hopes of every soul who had risked everything for the promise of just governance. "It suits you better than the old crown would have," Eirik observed, his weathered hands gentle as he adjusted the simple circlet. "This one was made for the queen you became, not the princess you were born to be." The coronation ceremony had taken place at dawn, witnessed by representatives from every settlement that had answered the war horn's call. But unlike the elaborate rituals of her father's time, this crowning emphasized service over dominance, partnership over hierarchy. When the people of Bjornvik knelt, it was not in submission, but in recognition of leadership earned through trial and proven worthy of trust. 3 months had passed since Magnus's death ended the conspiracy that had torn the northern kingdoms apart. The intervening weeks had brought a steady stream of former enemies seeking accommodation with the new order. Jarls and chieftains who recognized that resistance would bring only destruction while cooperation promised prosperity under a queen who understood both strength and mercy. The delegation from the eastern reaches arrived this morning, Bjorn reported as he approached their private council area overlooking the rebuilt harbor. "Jarl Sigurd Ironfist himself, seeking terms for his submission to your authority." Solveig nodded without surprise. Sigurd had been the last holdout among Magnus's allies, his mountain strongholds providing sanctuary for those who refused to accept the restoration. But isolated resistance could not long survive when trade routes favored those who acknowledged legitimate rule. When neighboring settlements prospered under just governance while his own territories stagnated under the burden of constant military preparedness. "What terms does he propose?" she asked, though her attention remained focused on the harbor where children played among fishing nets, their laughter a testament to the peace that had returned to these waters. "Complete submission in exchange for retention of his lands and titles," Bjorn replied. "He offers hostages as surety for his future loyalty, including his eldest son." "Hostages breed resentment," Eirik observed from his position beside the queen. "Better to bind former enemies through mutual benefit than through fear of retaliation." The crown caught morning sunlight as Solveig turned to consider her husband's counsel. Their partnership had deepened in the months following victory, their different perspectives combining to create governance that balanced idealism with pragmatism, mercy with justice. When difficult decisions arose, they faced them together, neither yielding to the other, but both committed to finding solutions worthy of the trust placed in them. "Send word to Sigurd that we will accept his submission without hostages," she decided after careful thought. "But his oath must be sworn publicly, before witnesses from every settlement in his territory. Let his people see that their Jarl chooses cooperation over conflict. And if he breaks his oath?" Bjorn pressed, his soldier's mind focused on the practical consequences of clemency. "Then he faces not just our justice, but the judgment of his own people who will have heard his promises," Solveig replied with quiet confidence. "A ruler who breaks faith with subjects loses more than external authority. They destroy the foundation upon which all legitimate power rests." The wisdom of her approach had already proven itself throughout the restored kingdom. Former enemies who expected harsh treatment instead found themselves welcomed into a broader alliance that offered security and prosperity to those who contributed honestly to the common good. The queen, who had once lived as a hunted beggar, understood the difference between ruling through fear and leading through respect. As afternoon settled over Bjornvik, Eirik found himself walking the familiar paths between workshops and homes, marveling at the transformation that had taken place. The settlement had grown from a refuge for displaced warriors into the capital of a restored kingdom, its population swelled by families seeking opportunity under just governance. The longhouse, where Solveig had first revealed her true identity, now served as the royal hall, its wooden walls carved with the stories of common people who had achieved greatness through courage rather than birth. Children learned to read using tablets that told of fishermen who became admirals, of farmers who became generals, of beggar women who became queens when circumstances demanded and character proved worthy. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had simply sailed away that morning? Solveig asked as they stood together on the harbor dock where their story had begun. If you had chosen trade over rescue, profit over principle? Eirik considered the question seriously before answering. I wonder sometimes about the paths not taken, he admitted. But I cannot imagine any choice that would have led to greater fulfillment than the one I made when I saw a woman in need and chose to offer help. The new crown gleamed in the setting sunlight, its simple design reflecting the values that had guided their unlikely journey from desperate alliance to true partnership. Around them, the sounds of a prosperous settlement carried on the evening breeze children's laughter. Craftsmen's hammers, merchants' negotiations, all the ordinary music of people living free from fear. Tomorrow we begin planning the Great Council, Solveig said, referring to the gathering that would formally unite the northern settlements under a common charter of governance. Representatives from every community, each voice counted equal in shaping the laws that will guide us. A kingdom ruled by consent rather than conquest, Eirik mused. Your father would be proud of what his daughter has built. We built, Solveig corrected gently, her hand finding his as they watched the sun paint the harbor water gold. Everything we accomplished together. The crown caught the last light of evening, a simple circlet that represented the most complex of human achievements, the willing cooperation of free people who had chosen to trust their futures to leaders who understood that true authority came not from the power to command, but from the wisdom to serve. In the harbor, where a beggar had once sought shelter, a queen now ruled with justice. And the choice between kindness and indifference had changed the fate of kingdoms.